Give yourself away. Give yourself away. Let go. Give yourself away. Give yourself away. Let go. Let go. Let go. Let go. Let go. Surrender to the power of the One. Surrender to the power of the One. Give yourself away. Give yourself away. Let go. Give yourself away. Give yourself away. Let go. Let go. Let go. Let go. Let go. Surrender to the power of the One. Surrender to the power of the One.
Pew that was handmade just for you, just for you. As we let go and let our bodies sink into the pew, that be symbolic of us resting in God. And let us not just let go physically, but we also let go mentally, emotionally, and we let go of all those things that we've been trying to figure out by ourselves. All those things that we've been trying to accomplish with our own personal effort. And all those feelings that we've stuffed or suppressed. Right here, right now, we're willing to release and let go. And trust in God, knowing that as we ask and as we trust God in every aspect of our lives, we are blessed, our cup is filled to overflowing. Today we affirm and we remember that God wishes only joy and happiness for us. There's nothing to earn. There are no dues to pay, no price to pay. There's no effort required to earn God's love. Those are just human ideas based on fear and a false sense of sacrifice. Right here, right now, we are ready, and we need only accept God's good into our lives. We let down the barriers that we have unwittingly erected, all those things that we do to keep God separate from us or to keep ourselves separate from God. And now we simply rest. There's nothing that we need do or be, but simply to rest, to relax, and to accept in the silence. let us remember that there is nothing that we need do or be but simply to rest, to relax, and accept. God's love is given freely. It's in God's nature to love unconditionally. And today we let go of any resistance and we joyfully accept peace and joy and grace right now, right here. Amen.
When I was a boy each week, on Sunday we would go to church, pay attention to the priest, and he would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. When I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two, and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still, and now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick. Is it anything is here at all? So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, I barely wet my fingertips, but now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world out there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down. Now I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. 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 Read a questioning child's face and say it's not a test of mine. It would be very hard to say. Another new morning comes and say it's not a sacrament. I tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. Remember when church let out, and things have changed since then. But everything is holy now. It used to be a world out there, having second rate hand me down, but I'm walking with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now.
Good morning. Wow, y'all are truly blessed with music like that. Thank you so much. Well, it's really my pleasure to be here today. I've heard so many good things about this spiritual community. You know, as Reverend Sandra said, my wife and I found Unity Church of the Hills in 1995. And for that first 5 years or so, whenever Ron and Lenore Scott needed a guest speaker, they would often call upon Reverend Karen Tudor, who was in Houston at the time, and she would come up and speak. And I just remember really delighting in her talks. And so you all have truly been blessed over the years with her presence. And so it's my pleasure to support you all as you are looking for your next full-time permanent minister. And so that's what we'll be doing this afternoon. So I don't know about you all, but some people are morning people and some people are night owls. I'm a night owl. You know, I stay up late. And so that's when my prayer time is, you know, before going to bed, and I'll lie down got a little couch in our bedroom, and I'll read my books and whatnot. And I've heard that there are people who actually wake up early in the morning, and you know, they have a nice, beautiful little spot, you know, like maybe they have a prayer altar in a little room, you know, sitting by a window looking out at nature, and you know, they'll sit down for a half hour, even an hour-long morning prayer. And I have to admit, I pop out of bed and I run to the bathroom, and my morning prayers are on the toilet, and while I'm getting dressed, and while I'm eating breakfast, and while I'm driving to work. I've just never been able to do that morning thing. So out of necessity, my challenge over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been to find a way to connect with Spirit throughout the day, to start my day right while I'm driving to work, and to remind myself throughout the day, because it's very easy to rush off to work, and then 8 or 10 hours later you get home and you realize never once did I actually ask God for help. Never once did I turn to Spirit for inspiration. It was just all, you know, I thought I was doing it all in my head. I'm an engineer, and so I'm more prone to, you know, just get into that logical state of mind and just be hunkering down and doing it all by myself. But what I've learned over the years is that things just work out a lot better when we ask for help, and when we're willing to turn to Spirit for guidance and direction. And so what we'll talk about today is, how do we stay connected? In the middle of our busy lives and the hustle and the bustle, how do we remain receptive, connected to Source, allowing ideas to flow to us and through us? And so I'll share a few examples, 2 of my own and 2 from others, that really have hit home for me and helped me to realize what I need to do to stay connected. So this must have been, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I was looking for something in the house. I needed it for the next weekend. So I had some time to find it, but I thought it was in a box somewhere. I thought I'd packed it away or something. So I felt like 2 hours. I don't know if it really was, but I went all over the house, and I went to every closet in every room. I pulled down every box I could find. Just couldn't find it. I went out in the garage. I was looking under the kitchen sink. It wouldn't be under the kitchen sink. I was just opening every cabinet, every door, every closet in the whole house, and I just couldn't find it. So I finally gave up, and the next day the whole process repeated itself again. And I'm looking everywhere and just looking and looking and looking. And to be honest, I was not at peace. It was a little bit like, where is this thing? I was getting frustrated, and I couldn't find it. This was my 15-year-ago self who would, get a little bit wound up by this stuff. And finally, I gave up. I think I let it rest for a couple days, and then there was some evening I was ready to start the search again, and I started walking around, and that frenzy started to wind up, and fortunately, I had the presence of mind to just stop. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but the prayer probably went something like, God, I know it's right for me to find this. I know that I am open and receptive, that you are the source of all ideas, all wisdom, and that I receive and I know where this object is. And ding, just an idea popped in, some image flashed in my mind. I still remember, I was standing in the game room. I made a beeline for the corner bedroom, opened up the closet, reached up, took down a box, opened it up, and there it was. Right in front of me. And I swear I opened that box up 5 times, or more in those days, and I was just completely blind to it. And I was delighted. Of course, I was delighted that I found the item, but really, I was more delighted that I had remembered to ask. And the contrast couldn't have been any more extreme between doing it by myself and asking for God's guidance and direction, and that request being answered. And so, really, I encourage all of you and all of us to ask ourselves, what am I doing all by myself? What am I doing that I think I have to do, and why not turn it over to God? Sometimes we think, well, the little stuff, I shouldn't pester or bother God with it, so I'll just figure that out by myself, and I'll wait for the big ones. Then when I really need help, then I'll ask. Well, that's a human concept, this idea that we could pester God and that God has a limited attention span. That's just a human concept, right? If God had a personality, she'd be more like a grandmother who just loved the squeals of her grandchildren and all the laughter and the yelling and the screaming and the giggles. It's like music to her ears. And wouldn't God just love to hear us all through the day asking for connection, for guidance, for direction? And so that's really our task, is to do that throughout the day. Got another really good example here. So there's this beautiful book by Jan Fraser called When Fear Falls Away. And she's a writer by trade, so when she had this experience and wrote about it, boy, did she really share it in a beautiful way. It's one of those books where you don't want to read it too fast. Like, you only want to read like a couple pages every night because you don't want to burn through it. You just want to savor it. It's so good. And so what she describes is this agonizing 16-year process where every year she would get a mammogram, and early on in this process, there were some false positives. So she had to get a biopsy and all this, and so she was just terrified. And every year when this happened, the days and weeks leading up to her needing to get the mammogram, and then afterwards waiting for the days for the radiologist to give the report back, she was just paralyzed. And she does a very good job of explaining just how paralyzed and just how fearful she was. And she had the help of her husband and friends, but just nothing that she did could shake it. And then if they had to do a biopsy, then she would just be paralyzed again for weeks while they were waiting for the pathology report to come back and waiting for the phone to ring, but she didn't want it to ring. She didn't really want to pick it up because she didn't want to hear the news, but she wanted it to be over. She was just in this state of mind that she just couldn't shake. Well, but then she shares this beautiful experience that she had. She explains it this way. And this is from her diary. She writes in her diary, she says, "Something happened today that I never would have thought possible. I went for my mammogram and I wasn't terrified. Really, the significant thing came last night. I was lying in bed, thinking ahead to today, dreading the trip to get the mammogram, anticipating the hyperventilating in the waiting room, the hideous anxiety. I was lying there thinking about all this, when all of a sudden I had this thought to say a little prayer, to ask for help. I said, could I maybe do this tomorrow without being terrified? That was her prayer. Could I maybe do this tomorrow without being terrified? And she says, who was I asking? I don't know really. But the moment I had that thought, I felt something happen, like something physical was lifted off of me. I felt dancing around my head, as if somebody were whirling and twirling me around me in circles, clapping hands, laughing, rejoicing. And so she was in this transformed state of mind, and then she goes on to explain that the next day she went, and there was no fear. She was just getting a mammogram. And she was going to a place where they could get a result within hours, and so as she was waiting, rather than this terrified state of mind that she'd been in before, she was just waiting for the results. And she was talking to the other ladies in the waiting room, and just, it was a completely different experience. And she describes it a few pages later, what had happened to her, and this state of mind that somehow she got into. She says, the dancing that I felt around my head when she was lying in bed saying that prayer, she said, it was like somebody was twirling, rejoicing, saying, finally, she asks. It's like there were legions of angels just waiting. And finally she asks, could I just not be terrified? And they're like, good enough. Listen. And they rushed in to just transform her experience. But the key was that she had to ask. And then from that point forward, it turns out not only did the fear fall away regarding the whole mammogram, all fear fell away from her life. And the rest of the book is her explaining how she adjusted to this new state of mind where fear was just gone. Nothing bothered her. She still had the same husband, the same kids, dog, house, job. Nothing had changed outside of her. But she was at peace. And she shared some experiences when something happened with her daughter or her son. And before she would have gone off the handle and been yelling at him, she said, I was able to be at peace and really, truly be helpful to them because she wasn't in this state of fear. So really, it's incumbent upon us to ask, what in my life am I holding separate? Somehow, why am I not asking for help? Why do I think I need to do it by myself? And sometimes even with our best intentions, we just get stuck in some area. I'm not sure why, but I encourage you to ask, what is it in my life that I'm stuck on? I can't seem to shake that unnatural fear, whatever it might be. And ask, what would it be like to just turn that over, to ask for help, to ask God for guidance and direction? And so sometimes we get in this hole, right? We get stuck. We're not sure why. We're in a funk. We don't know how to get out of it. And so what I found is that just by practicing this turning over, by practicing with all the little stuff, if all day long, every day, we're asking for help, for what should I say, what should I do, where should I go, asking for guidance on some tiny little task, well, that puts us in a regular habit of asking so that when the, quote, big things come along, we're ready to ask. It's natural. It's part of our everyday being. And so there's lots of ways that we can do this. One way is to make lists of all the things that we're willing to turn over to God, that we're willing to ask for help. We can review those in the morning or review those at night. Every time we give gratitude, many people keep a gratitude journal, but every time we give gratitude, we're saying, thank you, God. And that's an implicit receive as well. We're saying, and I would love to have more. So we're putting ourselves in this state of receivership. One thing also that helps is whenever we volunteer, and whenever we're serving others, when we're being of service to others, we get out of this me, I got to do it all by myself attitude, and we enter into this virtuous circle of giving and receiving. And that also sets us up for a state of being receptive and open to guidance and direction. But finally, we also, even if we're doing the asking, there's a key element that sometimes we forget, is that we have to listen. We have to get quiet and listen for the answer. Otherwise, it's like, la, 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 la. I'm just saying what I want, and I'm not willing to slow down and listen to the answer. There's a beautiful quote from A Course in Miracles. It says, the Holy Spirit's voice is as loud as your willingness to listen. Isn't that awesome? The Holy Spirit's voice is as loud as your willingness to listen. So we need to get into that state of listening. And, it doesn't really matter what we call upon. For me, God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, Christ consciousness, that's what works for me. But for other people, it's more like angels, guardian angels, guides, higher self, universe. The key is that we're calling upon something greater than ourselves, greater than our human mind. We're asking for help, asking for guidance and direction, and that allows us to tap in to the universal consciousness. And in the case of Jan Fraser, with the one that I just shared, she was studying with the Indian master, Guru Mai. And so her language was different, but it was the same result. So I'll share another example here that this one's great. It's from a book called Absence from Felicity by Ken Wapnick. And so this is basically the story of how A Course in Miracles was written. And so there's a woman by the name of Helen Schuckman and her colleague Bill Thetford, and he describes how this all came about, sort of like an after-the-fact biography of the whole thing. And the funny thing is, Helen Schuckman had a PhD in psychology. She was a research professor at the University of Columbia in New York City. And here she is psychology PhD, and she's hearing a voice in her head, which I think is quite ironic. And so she didn't tell any of her colleagues about this, except Bill. But every day she would write down in her notebook what the voice told her, and she called it the voice with a capital V. And she would write this down, and the next day he would type it up, and this, over a period of 10 years, became A Course in Miracles. So after she passed away, Ken Wapnick, who wrote this book, he got all of her notebooks and all of her materials, and he basically wrote this story. But there's a section in there where Helen would often get personal material, where the voice was giving her some ideas of what's going on in her life. So apparently she was looking for a coat, a winter coat. And she had her idea about how she should, go find this coat, which store she would go to, and, she thought that she had very fine tastes, and, certain stores were beneath her. Well, in any case, she's in this process of needing to go get a coat. And this is what the voice says to her, and she writes down. What she got was, the reason I direct everything that is unimportant is because it is no way to waste your free will. If you insist on doing the trivial your way, you waste too much time and will on it. Will cannot be free if it is tied up in trivia. It never gets out. I will tell you exactly what to do in connection with everything that does not matter. That is not an area where choice should be invested. There is better use of time. You have to remember to ask me, with a capital M, me. You have to remember to ask me to take charge of all minutiae, and they will be taken care of so well and so quickly that you cannot bog down in it. Isn't that beautiful? You have to remember to ask me to take charge of all minutiae, and they will be taken care of so well and so quickly that you cannot bog down in it. Does anybody else here feel like you got a bunch of minutiae in your life and too much stuff, you're bogged down, you can't get it all done, there's too much to do, woe is me? Now here's the punchline though. The next to the punchline, it says, the only remaining problem is that you will be unwilling to ask because you are afraid not to be bogged down. Whoa, that one really hit home for me. The only remaining problem is that you will be unwilling to ask because you are afraid not to be bogged down. So sometimes, for some silly reason, it's hard to comprehend, we fill our lives with busyness and franticness, the gerbil wheel of life, almost as a defense against the truth, like, heaven forbid that I would have all this free time to just sit there and be silent. I might actually have to face my own thoughts. And so it's an honest reminder that we might not want to be not bogged down. But eventually we get tired of it, right? We get tired. We're like, you know what? It's just not worth it anymore. All that effort, all that difficulty, I think I'm willing to ask for help this time. So he continues, and it says, do not let this hold us back. If you will ask, and that's the key point, if you will ask, I can arrange these things, even if you are not too enthusiastic. Prayer can be very specific in little matters. If you need a coat, ask me where to find one. I know your taste well. And I also know where the coat is that you would eventually buy anyway. So it's just beautiful that, how it went about, and then Ken actually summarizes what happened. He says, not only did Helen find exactly the coat she wanted, but the salesman who waited on her needed Helen's help very badly. He had a retarded child and was at a loss for what to do. And Helen was able to be extremely helpful to him. See, her area of expertise in psychology was on childhood psychological disorders. And so it wasn't about the coat at all. It was about her being guided and directed to the right store when that particular salesman was there so she could be of service to him and his child. And that's what happens. If we allow God to take care of all the minutiae in our life, we can be guided and directed to be in the right place at the right time, to be a blessing to others, and we are always blessed in the process as well. It's a little bit humorous. There's a few more. Another paragraph there. It says, and this is the voice speaking to her again, I cannot save you more time than you will let me. But if you are willing to try the higher shopping service, and the higher shopping service is all in caps, which also covers all lower order necessities, and even quite a number of whims within reason, I have very good use for the time we could save. And it goes on to talk about how you ask, and the specificity that you ask, or asking in general, and allowing yourself to be in the flow, rather than getting fixated on the way that you think something needs to be. So we hear something like that, and we're like, okay, count me in. I'm good. I want to get more of this inspiration and guidance and direction. I want to be in that flow. And so, but how do we do that when we're not particularly inspired? We're not feeling the juice. We're not feeling, that just doesn't feel like it's flowing naturally. And at least for me, what I've done is I've got a bunch of little techniques and tools that I use to help me maintain that state of consciousness throughout the day. And so sometimes I used to use sticky notes, stick them all over the place. Yesterday I just walked around and I picked up a whole bunch of these little things I got scattered around in the bathroom, at my desk, taped to the computer monitor. I put them in the car, put them in my wallet. So I've just got all these little quotes. Now I got a new one that I've got this morning. And so these really work for me. And also, now that we've got cell phones, I've got my Course in Miracles lessons on there. So several times throughout the day, I'll bring that up and I'll read my lesson. You can get your daily word delivered by email now every day, and there's a daily chicken soup for the soul. There's all kinds of ways that we can get these daily inspirational things. And I don't just consume them all in the morning. I'm too busy anyways. But I don't just consume them all at once. I just sort of enjoy them throughout the day. And that helps prevent me from getting into that gerbil wheel state of consciousness where 8 hours later I've never once thought about anything beyond my human brain. And of course, there's things like Alan Cohen's book, A Daily Dose of Sanity. There's 365 stories in there. You can read one a day. Those are always inspirational. What I've found to work for me also is that I've memorized several prayers that I really particularly enjoy, or inspirational quotes. And it takes a long time. I print it out, and it just takes me a long time. But eventually, I memorize it, and then I can just say that while I'm driving to work, while I'm lying in bed, if I wake up. But those inspirational quotes then become part of our internal dialogue with ourselves. And so there's one that I particularly enjoy. I've probably said it a couple thousand times now. And it's from A Course in Miracles. And I often say it when I'm going into a new situation. Like I'm going into a meeting as I'm driving into work. I said it this morning on my way here. But whenever I'm going into a situation and I want to be in a state of being guided and directed, I say this prayer, and it goes like this. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent Him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because He who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever He wishes, knowing He goes there with me. I will be healed as I let Him teach me to heal. And when I say that prayer, I'm entering into this state of being willing to be guided and directed, to be willing to listen. And by the way, Linda earlier went and made a bunch of copies of that, put it out on the table out in the foyer. So if you want to get a copy of that, it's on page 28 of A Course in Miracles. But that prayer for me, after I've said it several thousand times, it's sort of in my consciousness. So when I was at work several years ago, one of the guys who sits in the cube across from me, he'd been working on it, so he had mentioned it, but he was working on an issue for like days and days, like 3 days he'd been working on this issue. And finally he says, hey, Neil, would you mind to come over and take a look at this with me? I'm stuck. I just can't figure this out. And so in the 10 seconds or so that it took me to get up out of my cube and walk over to his cube, I started to say that prayer. Just the first line, I am here only to be truly helpful. And as I said that first line, then the whole prayer just comes rushing back to me because it's sort of embedded in my consciousness. And it puts me in that state of mind where I'm being of service, allowing God to work through me, and being willing to listen. So he showed me the symptom and the problem. This is in software, and I had an idea what it was. We started digging down and going through some files and looking. And within 5 minutes, we had found the exact problem as one line of code. We made a simple change, recompiled, ran it again, and it worked. And he was delighted because he'd spent 3 days working on this, and the whole thing was solved in 5 minutes. I was delighted because I had made a shift in my consciousness, that I was applying this at work. See, what happened was that for years and years and years, I would go to work, do my engineering thing, use my human brain. And then I would go to church and go home, and that's where I received all my inspiration. That's where spirituality took place. And so, I don't know if you remember the old cell phone calling plans. They had nights and weekends. So that was the time when all spirituality took place, was during nights and weekends. And then during the day at work, I was an engineer. But I was delighted to be able to apply these spiritual principles that I was learning at work and to receive such quick and easy guidance and direction. So to summarize, if you notice all four of these stories, the common theme was that there's a willingness. There's an act of asking, that we have to ask. And until we ask, we're just doing it on our own. And we can really confuse ourselves if we just are trying to use our human mind to get things done. But this long, uninterrupted state of sort of worldly thinking can be broken up. You know, that state of mind can be relieved by turning and asking for guidance and direction. So I encourage you in the week ahead to just ask, what areas of my life am I keeping separate? Am I keeping separate from God and sort of doing on my own? And just ask, am I willing to turn those over? Am I willing to ask for help? And I also encourage you when you get home today to just do one thing that will help foster this daily prayer consciousness. Maybe it's a favorite prayer that you want to memorize. You know, you cut some things out, tape them to your mirror, your monitor, whatever it might be. Sign up for one of those daily inspirational emails. Whatever it works for you, I encourage you to do that. And I'll close with one thought. A friend of mine used to work as a chaplain at the United Nations in New York. And there was a great spiritual master named Gopi Krishna who came to the United Nations to, I guess, speak to some people. And Chuck was also, my friend, was a photographer on the side. So he did a portrait session with Gopi Krishna. And after that whole thing was done, at the end, my friend asked him, he was basically asking him, you know, the key to this spiritual enlightenment, and, you know, well, essentially he said, what's the key to enlightenment? And what Gopi Krishna said, which my friend shared with me, and he's never forgotten, and I've never forgotten it either, he said, it's very simple. He said, every day, as often as you can, just think about God, and God will take care of all the rest. Every day, as often as you can, just think about God, and God will take care of all the rest. Thank you for having me today. Namaste.